say, Kevin, get started here.
Let's do it.
Welcome, everyone. This is our final event in our series called Comfort in Uncomfortable Places. And my name is Christina. I'm the Community Marketing Manager for Arcteryx here in Chicago. And tonight we welcome Kevin Adler. He's an Arcteryx ambassador, as well as Chief Solutions Officer at the Altitude Group, a coaching and consulting company based here in Chicago. Kevin calls himself an outdoor junkie whose passions include skiing, snowshoeing, camping, hiking, kayaking, of course, climbing. Kevin took his lifelong passion for the mountains and translated it into a pursuit of high altitude mountaineering. He's climbed 8 big peaks all over the world and currently has his eye on the 7 summits, the highest peaks on each of the 7 continents. He has 2 summits already checked off of that list. During non-pandemic times, Kevin also teaches martial arts and runs self-defense seminars throughout Chicago while enjoying time with his daughter, who is also his co-instructor and on this call right now. Hey. He also, if you've ever seen the band Super Bloom play, yep, that is the same Kevin who's the lead singer of the band, for anybody wondering. Kevin's personal experiences have led him to wanting to share his schoolings in life and adventure with others. He does so through his business, helping his clients to elevate their leaders and create inspired and mission-aligned cultures. And tonight he will share some of those teachings with the Arcteryx Chicago community as he presents lessons from the mountains. Please feel free to enter your questions and comments in the chat feature throughout the presentation, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end. And with that, we welcome Kevin Adler.
Thank you, Christina.
Thanks, Kevin.
So first and foremost, let me say a big round of thank you to my partners and friends at Arcteryx and to all of you for taking the time to show up this evening. I am a lifelong personal growth junkie and obviously madly passionate about the mountains. And truly one of the great privileges of my life is to be able to combine both those passions and share both my love for the mountains and the lessons that I've learned from those experiences along the way with all of you. So thank you guys for giving me that opportunity, because if the participant count said 0, this would be a very different conversation. So thank you for that. And with that, I think we'll jump right in. For those of you that jumped in after Christina asked me, this question was taken on the summit of Cotopaxi, which is one of 2 glacial peaks I just returned from climbing in Ecuador. Cotopaxi is the tallest active volcano in the world. It tops out at a little more than 19,000 feet. I'm lucky enough to have some of my climbing friends who were with me on that trip on this call today. In fact, this picture was taken immediately after hugging a fellow climber named Julie, who is on this call. And I tend to cry on summits. And so I'm crying in this one, and they're tears of joy. The umbrella theme for this speaker series, which I'm fortunate enough to be a part of, is getting comfortable in uncomfortable places. And I think this quote really nicely sums up part of why that's so important to embrace. In suffering, you meet yourself, don't avoid it, learn from it. And that's really been one of the themes of my life. When I lived in the city when I was younger, I used to participate in Bikram yoga. And there was a 2-word saying in that form of hot yoga, and the saying was suffer some. And the idea is that there is growth when you are outside your comfort zone. So we're going to look at that as part of our holistic view at the lessons that the mountains have offered. This is just a grid view of the 9 peaks that I have been lucky enough to climb, going left to right, top to bottom. Mount Rainier was my first climb in 2013. Took a couple-year break, and then the next one is Kilimanjaro. In the upper right-hand corner is a view of the Himalayas with Everest and Ama Dablam and some of the most beautiful mountains in the world. Middle left is Chilean Patagonia, absolutely stunning. Middle right in black and white is Mount Elbrus, which is the tallest peak in Europe and one of the 7 summits. Middle right is what is middle right? Middle right is Aconcagua. How could I possibly forget Aconcagua? Aconcagua is the tallest peak in South America and one of the 7 summits. I came up a little short of the summit on that one. We'll talk about the lesson that came out of that. Bottom left is Mount Washington, which is in New Hampshire and is known for having some of the worst weather in the world. And I was fortunate enough to experience some of that weather. And then the last two are Cotopaxi and Cayambe, which are two volcanic glacial peaks in Ecuador, and the trip I most recently returned from just a couple weeks ago. So with that, here is a snapshot of the lessons that we are going to review coming off of each of those incredible experiences that I was lucky enough to have. From Mount Rainier, we're going to talk about say yes and what happens when you think you have nothing left in the tank. From Kilimanjaro, we're going to talk about how to break big tasks into small steps. We're going to talk about the idea of mindfully forward, and we're going to learn a really beautiful lesson in gratitude. From my trip to Nepal, which was my first and most certainly won't be my last, I'm actually contemplating going back there this spring. I climbed Lobuche Peak and spent a couple nights at Everest Base Camp. And there's two big lessons from that experience. Your pace is your pace, and your legs, your lungs. I'll absolutely explain what that means when we get there. From Chile and Patagonia, every day is training for the next day, one of my favorite lessons in this entire presentation. Mount Elbrus in Russia, see for yourself, acknowledge your fear. And a quote from one of the folks who's attending this call, Blaine, you can't do epic shit with basic people. Again, one of my favorites, and should definitely be on a t-shirt. From Aconcagua, slow things down, another really beautiful lesson, and mindset is everything. From Mount Washington, train smart, not just hard. And the lessons come from the climb, not the summit, right? From Ecuador, the trip I just came back from, meet yourself where you are, and the relationship between belief and doubt and how you make that choice. So with that said, let's take a look at the first mountain and the lessons coming out of that. The first mountain that I climbed back in 2013 was Mount Rainier, which is here in the lower 48 in Washington State. And the lesson is say yes. So the story behind Mount Rainier, and it was really a life-changing experience for me. It started my climbing career. I've always had a deep love of the mountains, and it's something that I just kind of feel in my soul when I look at the mountains. When I was younger and I would go out to Colorado, I would look at the mountains and it would absolutely stir my soul. And it kind of was always on my floating to-do list. You know, we all have these, maybe someday I'll insert thing here, right? And for me, one of them was maybe someday I'll climb a mountain. Very good friend of mine, who I believe also might be on this call, Dan Silberman, was turning 40, a couple years ahead of him on that path. And when he was turning 40, he said to me, you know what, I want to do something epic. I want to climb a mountain. Would you consider coming with me? And I said, yes. I honestly didn't do a truckload of research on what I was getting myself into. And I said, yes. And what a beautiful life lesson. It absolutely changed the course of my life. It ignited or connected me more deeply to an existing passion for the mountains. And everything that I am today was shaped by that experience. And it all came with saying yes. So the big life lesson here is say yes. When opportunities come your way, say yes, because that's where the magic happens. And to say that Mount Rainier was outside of my comfort zone would be an understatement. Mount Rainier is not an insignificant mountain to climb. It's got some technical aspects to it. Something like 10 to 15 people a year die on Mount Rainier. And we live in suburban Chicago, so we trained on a sledding hill by our house, loading up backpacks with coins and books and shoes and whatever we could put in there. And I remember when we showed up for orientation at the Climbing Guide Services headquarters, we went around the room. There were 8 climbers and 4 guides, and we went around the room and they said, introduce yourself, say what your climbing experience is, where are you from? And so the first guy says, I'm Barry, I'm a member of the Seattle Mountaineers, and I climb up to Muir Camp out in Rainier every weekend just for training. And the next guy goes and he says, I'm Jeff, and I just got back from climbing Aconcagua. And one after another, these 8 climbers one had more experience than the next. And they get to me and I said, I'm Kevin, he's Dan. We live in suburban Chicago. We've been training on a sledding hill and this is our first mountain. And everybody looked at us like we were absolutely insane. But we said yes to the experience and we showed up, and it was, as I said, life-changing and absolutely formative as far as my relationship with climbing. That's a picture of me on the summit of Rainier. I was absolutely wrecked at this point. I mean, if I was to zoom in and you were to see my face, my lips are white, my cheeks are blue. I am absolutely exhausted. It took every bit of energy just to take this picture. And the lesson here is when you think you have nothing left, you do. You have so much more. There's an endurance race, a very famous endurance race in Colorado called the Leadville 100, I think it's called. And their tagline for the race is, "You are stronger than you think you are, and you can do more than you think you can." And I'll tell you, again, one of those life-changing moments that happened to me in the mountains. We got to, I'm going to say 11,500 feet, maybe 12,000 feet. And we were on a brief hydration break. And I was experiencing early onset altitude sickness. I was sitting in the snow. I was shivering uncontrollably. And the guides were standing over me talking about sending me down and aborting my climb. My daughter, who was also on this call, had given me a box that on the way to the airport, basically. She had given me a box, and in the box was an eraser, a paper clip, and a rubber band, and a note that said, the eraser is to remind you that you can erase any mistake. The paper clip is to remind you can hold it together, and the rubber band is to remind you can stretch further than you think you can. I always get choked up telling this story. I wore that rubber band on the climb, and I'm sitting in the snow, shivering uncontrollably, listening to the guides talk about sending me down and contemplating the end of this climb. And my buddy Dan, who was on that climb with me, turned to me and he said, "Look at your wrist, think of Bella, get on your feet," and you'll pardon my French, and he said, "Let's fucking finish this thing." And I got to my feet and I chugged some water, and we made it to the top of that mountain, and of course back down, because here I am. And it was wonderful, wonderful affirmation of this very fundamentally important idea that I learned in the mountains that I think applies to every aspect of our lives, right? When you think you have nothing left, there's always more in the tank. You're stronger than you think you are, and you can do more than you think you can. And it's one of the messages that I'm so passionate about in my coaching work, in instilling in people that belief in themselves. The next mountain we're going to move on to is Kilimanjaro. And this is a prominent feature on Kilimanjaro called the Barranco Wall. And what I'll tell you about Kilimanjaro is people say that it's the easiest of the 7 summits. We don't use the word, I don't use the word easy in mountaineering. I just don't think that word fits, right? People say that Kilimanjaro is the easiest of the 7 summits. There's nothing easy about it. It's easier than some of the other ones, but nothing in mountaineering is easy. This is a view from one of the high camps of what's called the Barranco Wall. And the Barranco Wall is a visually intimidating feature. And I remember freaking out as I was attempting to drift off to sleep on this night in my tent on Kilimanjaro, looking at this thing and saying, how the hell am I going to get up that monster tomorrow? And, you know, one of the things that I carry in my backpack on every climb is a tremendous load of self-doubt. It is just part of what I am burdened with in my life and in this sport/hobby. And so I went to bed that night. I don't think I got a lot of sleep. I was filled with self-doubt. And this picture is me the next day on the Barranco Wall, which turned out to be absolutely one of my favorite parts of Kilimanjaro. I have an absolute love of rock climbing and rock scrambling, and it was just a whole bunch of fun. And the lesson here is to break big tasks into small steps. You know, the other way people say that is, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? But after seeing the beautiful elephants on the safari in Africa after this trip, I can't bear that saying anymore. So we take big tasks and we break them into small steps, because if you take this view, you say, holy shit, how am I going to get up that thing? And then you take one step at a time and you make your way up. So break big tasks into small steps, really important lesson. This is a beautiful, beautiful view, one of hundreds of beautiful views I had over the course of this particular climb. Tanzania is a gorgeous country. The people are beautiful. This is a group of porters making their way up the mountain as part of our support team. And it's just a stunning country. It's a beautiful mountain. And the motto for me, I try and carry some mantras with me on each climb. And the mantra for this climb was mindfully forward. And each word in that mantra carries as much weight as the next. And what I mean by that is, it's really easy to just look down at your feet the whole time. And it's really easy to be destination obsessed, right? I just got to get to the summit. I just got to get to the next camp. And that's the forward part, right? But the mindful part is actually slowing down, taking the time to look around, appreciating the incredible beauty of these magical places that I'm so fortunate enough to experience, and the people and the scenery and everything about these experiences. And so there's a company called Intent bracelets, I believe, and they make these hand-stamped bracelets that you can sort of send them a mantra or an intention, and they'll put it on the bracelet. And I actually had one made for myself for this climb that said "mindfully forward," because I wanted to be reminded every time I look down at my wrist to continue to put one foot in front of the other, break those big tasks into small steps, but also be mindfully present to all of the beauty that was available to me in this incredible experience. So mindfully forward. This is not on the mountain. This is after the mountain. When we got down from Kilimanjaro, we went on a safari, and it was incredible. Everything about it was incredible. Probably my favorite part of that safari was visiting a Maasai village in the middle of the Serengeti. And this is the schoolhouse. You can see it's pretty basic. It's made of wood and dirt. And this is an absolutely beautiful lesson in gratitude. And I wanted to include this because these beautiful, beautiful kids, when I tell you that they had absolutely nothing, the picture on the right, what those three beautiful kids are playing with is a rock, literally a rock. And the smiles on their faces and the joy that emanated from them and the light in their eyes. We get bent out of shape if our iPhone 11 if the battery drains too quickly. I actually came back from this climb, and I live in this little affluent bubble of suburbs in Chicago, and I came back from this climb and I met a friend for lunch, and a friend of hers stopped by the table and was complaining that her Italian marble for her new kitchen countertops was delayed. And it was just such a remarkable, contrast in experiences. So I wanted to share this beautiful lesson in gratitude. Whatever we have, it's enough. It's probably more than somebody else has. And so, one of the other mantras that I like to carry with me in my life is this idea of know your roots, count your blessings, and strive for more. It's absolutely okay to continue to work to better yourself and better your life, but know your roots and count your blessings. And this is a beautiful, that's the way this lesson really kind of got driven home for me. This is one of my favorite pictures from Nepal. This was on an acclimatization hike on our way to Everest Base Camp. And the lesson here is that your pace is your pace. I'm a competitive guy by nature. I'm a type A human being. I'm competitive, and I am at the same time usually in the back of the pack on any climb I'm on. Sucks to admit that, but it's true. So if there's 18 climbers, as there were in this particular group, I was usually one of, if not the last people into camp every single day. And, that can be tough on your ego if you're a competitive guy. And the reality is there is no trophy for getting to camp first. There's no trophy for getting to camp last. Your pace is your pace. Your progress is your progress. And I think that we all, at various layers of our lives, run the risk of suffering from compare-itis. And there's another beautiful saying, comparison is the thief of joy. And, gosh, all my friends are getting married. Why aren't I married yet? Gosh, all my friends are getting promotions at work. When's it going to be my turn? Gosh, all my friends are moving to big houses in the suburbs. When's it going to be my turn? And I think that's a really self-defeating mindset to find yourself stuck in. Your pace is your pace, whether it's on a mountain or in life. And there's another saying that I carry around with me, which is the meaning of life is finding the balance between making things happen and letting things happen. And do what you can to make the things happen that you want to happen in your life, but also stay grounded in the fact that your pace is your pace. So this was a really beautiful lesson that I learned on that climb, and that I continue to learn on every climb that I experience. This is me dangling roughly 19 plus 20,000 feet in the air on my way to the summit of Lobuche Peak, which was the mountain in the Khumbu region that I climbed after visiting Everest Base Camp. And it's probably the scariest climb that I've been on, and the one I felt the least confident in. Beautiful blue skies, challenging conditions, and I got down from this climb, and it was a pretty rough climb for me. And I got down from this climb, and I went up to our lead Western guide, who was a very famous international mountain guide named CJ, Craig John. And I said, CJ, I just have to thank you. I absolutely couldn't have done this without your help. I owe you so much gratitude. And CJ smiled and looked at me and he said, your legs, your lungs. And I think the lesson here, guys, is look for the support you need. Don't be under the illusion that you have to do anything yourself, by yourself, figure it out by yourself. There's always people who are there to support you. And then also acknowledge and embrace and hold yourself accountable for doing the work, right? Because all of the support that we have available to us, at the end of the day, it is still ultimately our responsibility to do the work. It comes up in every new client conversation that I have as a coach. I like to tell my clients that my job is not to provide them the answers, not to solve their problems for them, but rather to connect them to the inner strength, to the resilience, to the wisdom that they have inside of them already. And this is the idea, right? Like, you have to be willing to do the work. It's your legs and your lungs that will get you to the top of the actual or metaphorical mountain. So find the support you need, whether it's a belay line like you see in this picture attached to my harness, or a guide, or a coach, or a friend, or a therapist, or whatever that form of support is for you and whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. But just know that at the end of the day, it's your legs and your lungs that are going to get you to that summit. The next picture is from Chilean Patagonia. Absolutely gorgeous place. This is less of a climb and more of a trek. And I encourage anybody that is looking for an absolutely stunning nature experience that also provides some challenging physicality to it to consider a trek in Patagonia. The lesson here is every day is training for the next day. It's such a powerful lesson. And I'll tell you how I came to learn this lesson in this moment on this trip. This was the next trip I took after Nepal. So I had trekked, I think it's something like 68 miles to Everest Base Camp. I had climbed a 20,000 foot mountain in Lobuche Peak, and I came home feeling like a little bit of a badass. And then I signed up for this trekking trip in Patagonia, and it specifically had the word trekking in the description. And like a jackass, I didn't train for it at all. I took, several months off and sat on the couch and ate pizza and relaxed with my dog, and didn't take this trip seriously at all. And I showed up for this trip, and when I tell you that the terrain was substantially similar to what I encountered in Nepal on the trek to Everest Base Camp. It was up, it was down. They call it in Nepal, they call it Nepali flat, where you go straight up and straight down and straight up and straight down. This was the exact same kind of terrain. The difference being that I wasn't trained in advance. I wasn't training in advance of this trip. So it kicked the holy shit out of me. And I finished the first day of this trip and I was wrecked. I was absolutely destroyed, both physically and mentally and emotionally. And I was really, really upset. We had a guy on this trip who was a lieutenant with the Manhattan, New York City SWAT team. He was one of the first responders at 9/11 and just a complete badass of a human being. And he came up to me and in an effort to sort of console me and help get my head right, he said to me, tomorrow you'll be stronger than you were today. And the next day you'll be stronger than you were the previous day. And every day on this trip, you'll get stronger. So just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And it really reset my mindset for the trip. And it really drove home this idea for me that every day is training for the next day. So show up as intentionally as you can. Learn from everything that you go through every day. And know that if you show up consciously, you will be prepared for the next day, even more so than you were that day. Every day is training for the next day. I think it's a really beautiful lesson. The next slide is the first picture from our trip to Russia to climb Mount Elbrus. This was a uniquely special experience in the sense that, and really this is one of the privileges of climbing, is we don't just chopper in, climb a mountain, get off the mountain and go home. By definition of acclimatization, there is some time and space on the front end of the trip. And these trips are also designed for a little bit of cultural immersion as well. The lesson here, so these pictures are taken in, gosh, I can't remember the name of the square now in Russia, a very famous square in Russia. The Winter Palace is off to the left. If you look at some historical pictures of some of the most famous moments in Russian history, the picture on the right, that arch and that the sculptures above that arch are prominently featured in pivotal moments in Russian history. And this is in St. Petersburg, where we spent, I think, 2 days before heading to the region where Mount Elbrus was. And, you know, I had all these preconceived notions about what life in Russia looked like. And I, you know, being fed sort of traditional Western media and the movies and everything else, and never having had any actual exposure to Russia, I kind of thought it was all going to be gray and drab, and the people would be, you know, kind of very George Orwell 1984, and the people would be just kind of expressionless, and it would be this very drab place. And nothing could be further from the truth. St. Petersburg is one of the most beautiful cities I've ever been to anywhere in the world. And I specifically included this picture on the left because that's just a couple of teenagers enjoying some Burger King. And how universal is that, right? I mean, not for me because ew, but that's just a couple of teenagers enjoying some fast food. And the universality of that moment that I captured in that picture, and the beauty and openness. And, you know, look, let's acknowledge that they're a political sort of adversary of ours, and you know, this is not a political discussion. This is about humanity. And from a humanistic perspective, one of the things that global travel starts to teach you is that we're all the same, right? We all have the same dreams and fears and goals and aspirations. And we just want to sit with our friends and hang out and have a good meal. And, you know, the lesson here is see for yourself, right? There's another beautiful saying that travel is the enemy of bigotry and small-mindedness, and nothing could be more true, right? Because all the preconceived notions that you have of any other people, whether they're your neighbors that you may not know, or people on the other side of the globe, go see for yourself. Because it is an eye-opener and a mind-opener and a heart-opener, quite frankly. And so that was the first really powerful lesson to come for me from Russia. And this happened on the first day we were really there. This is the walk up to the summit of Mount Elbrus in Russia, the tallest peak in Europe. I actually think that's Blaine on the tail end of that picture there. Good on you, Blaine. And you know, again, I don't believe in the word easy when it comes to mountaineering. I think it's preposterous to use the word easy when referring to anything having anything to do with the mountains. But Elbrus is known as one of the easier climbs on the spectrum of the 7 summits. That being said, there's some steep parts, and the weather is very unpredictable on this mountain. And there was a point in time on this climb, I think it was just below the saddle. I think it was on the traverse below the saddle, where we were getting our asses kicked by the wind, and there were some really steep sections, and I was absolutely overcome with that fear and self-doubt that unfortunately, for better or worse, I carry with me up these mountains on these experiences. And one of our lead guides, who was an incredibly accomplished international climbing guide who happens to be based in Russia, her name is Alexandra. She goes by Sasha, and she has a special place in my heart forever. She saw me on one of the breaks really struggling with my mindset, and she took me aside and quite frankly just gave me a hug, and I cried my ass off for a good couple of minutes. And then she patted me on the shoulder and she said, all right, let's go do this thing, right? And it was a real transformational experience for me, because I had never really voiced and admitted any of this sort of fear and weakness before out loud, and I kind of didn't believe in it. I didn't believe that there was value in acknowledging fear or weakness, because this idea of just powering through was always really fundamental to my mindset. And what I learned in that moment on that experience is sometimes you have to acknowledge your fear in order to move past it. That's what Sasha did for me in that moment. And it really changed the way I think about that. And so a different relationship with vulnerability in terms of how I moved through that moment and what I took away from it that I try and apply to other areas of my life. This is us on the summit of Mount Elbrus, some absolutely world-class people in this picture. You can't see her particularly well, but behind the, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor moving or not, but right behind that Kosovo flag is a woman named Marika. This is her dad. She became the youngest woman in history to complete the 7 summits. She did it by the age of 18. And this is Sasha. She was the woman I just mentioned, who is absolutely a world-class guide. This is Mike Hamill back there with his fist raised. Mike literally wrote the book on climbing the 7 summits and has lapped the 7 summits 6 times. There's a world-class group of people. And my buddy Blaine coined this phrase on this trip: you can't do epic shit with basic people. And on its face, the elitist nature of that statement makes my girlfriend absolutely cringe. But here's what it means, right? It's not about elitism. It's about surrounding yourself with like-minded people who lift you up and support you in the pursuit of your goals. I had an old coach who used to say, when you're with eagles, you soar. And that's what this quote means to me. Find your tribe, connect to your values, align yourself with people who share those values, and you'll find that it elevates your life. So you can't do epic shit with basic people. That's you really haven't lived until you've heard Blaine in his Manitoba, Canada accent say that quote. The next climb is Aconcagua. It is a beautiful, nasty, dusty pile of rocks, and certainly one of the hardest climbing experiences that I have had on multiple levels. Aconcagua is what we call an unsupported climb. What that means is 100% of what you need travels on your back up the mountain. So on any given day, we could have 50 plus pounds, 55 plus pounds in our pack, on our back, making our way up this steep, loose, unstable terrain. I mean, if you really kind of look closely at that picture, you'll see that the majority of the terrain on Aconcagua is kind of just loose rock, right? And what would happen frequently on the steepest parts of this climb was you would lose your footing. So you've got 50 plus pounds on your back, you're going up a steep incline and you're stepping on scree and you would lose your footing. And for me, when I would lose my footing, because I'm scared of getting hurt up there because there's not a lot of great options to rescue you if you get hurt at certain spots on these mountains. So anytime I would lose my footing, I would get really freaked out. And our guide on this trip, a gentleman named Josh Tapp, shared this incredible lesson with me. And again, it was very specific to the scenario we were in, and I think has broader implications for all of us. And the lesson was, when things start getting out of control, just stop, just slow things down, right? And in a very technical sense, in this environment, you know, part of that advice was regulate your breathing, right? Don't let your footing slip, regain your footing, and start banging your way up the mountain again, because your heart's going to be doing this and your brain is going to be doing this, and it's not a good state to climb in. And so, you know, Josh's advice was, every time you lose your footing and you feel your heart rate spike, stop, slow things down, let everything regulate and come back to a stable place, and then proceed. And it was a remarkably effective tool for me on this trip, and something that I have absolutely tried to apply in my life. And I have to imagine that for all of us, we've had moments in our life of absolute chaos, right? And what would happen in those moments if we took that advice, if we just slowed things down, let our breathing regulate, right? Get a sense of equilibrium before we react. I also happen, I think Christina mentioned it in the intro, I happen to be a lifelong teacher and student of martial arts. And that's a fundamental lesson in the martial arts. When you're in a combat situation in the martial arts, the more you are able to slow things down, the more clearly you're able to see and respond, as opposed to reacting to what's happening, right? So really important, powerful lesson there. This picture is the visual representation of the next and probably one of the hardest and at the same time most important lessons I've learned in my entire climbing career. So this is at 21,500 feet on Aconcagua on summit day. And it was, the bad news is the summit of Aconcagua is 23,000 feet. And this was my turnaround point on this mountain. It's a little hard to talk about because it's the first time in my life, literally, that I've ever set a goal that I haven't accomplished. I used to run half marathons and 5Ks and 10Ks, and I never signed up for a race that I didn't finish. Literally never signed up for a race I didn't finish. I'm a competitive, type A, goal-driven human being. And in my life, I set goals, I do the work, and I accomplish those goals. And in this particular case, for a variety of reasons, I made the decision to turn around. Nobody turned me around. I made the decision to turn around at 21,500 feet. And the lesson here is mindset is everything. Without boring you with more detail than we have time for, there was a series of variables. You know, we talked earlier when the Zoom crashed about how, you know, shit happens, right? And unplanned shit happens. And there was a series of significantly less than ideal variables that were thrust upon us on this day and in this moment. And I made the decision in that moment to turn around. And, you know, very, very short version of the story is, and it's only part of the story, but our guide that was with the group of climbers that I was in that moment, it was basically telling us that at our pace, we weren't going to make the summit in a safe amount of time. And it was an inevitability that he was going to turn us around. While he was telling us this, we were getting the absolute shit kicked out of us by just raging wind, freezing cold temperatures. I mean, I can't tell you how many layers I have on in this picture. And in that moment, I said, well, if he's going to turn us around anyway, I'm not going to keep punishing myself. I'm going to turn myself around. And I deeply, 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 deeply regret that decision. There is not a day in my life that goes by that I don't think about that decision. And it has fueled everything that I do going forward as a climber. It has completely changed how I train. It has completely changed the mindset that I bring with me on these trips. And that's the lesson, right? Mindset is absolutely everything. Ronda Rousey, who is a former UFC champion, has a quote. She says, I never lose. I either win or I learn. And in this failure, and it took me a very long time to not frame it as anything other than that. And in this failure, I learned more than any summit that I have reached on any of my other climbs. So in mountaineering, in life, mindset is absolutely everything. And again, it's one of the most powerful things I do with my coaching clients is we really drill down on what the most empowering mindset is going to be to help them move forward in their lives. This is Mount Washington, which is in North Conway, New Hampshire. It is known for having some of the worst weather, not just in the United States, but in the world. That's me and my buddy Julie, who is on this call, making our way up Mount Washington. And there's two lessons that I'm going to share with you from this experience. And I thought about putting video in here so that you could see how hard we were getting our ass kicked by the conditions. The wind on Mount Washington was unlike any wind I have ever experienced. I would argue that it was a stronger wind than what we experienced on Aconcagua. And at the same time, we were in a whiteout snowstorm. And there's really sort of two lessons. And spoiler alert, we didn't make the summit, right? We made the decision, our guide really made it for us, with us, to turn around before the summit. And it was just based upon available daylight relative to our pace. And there's really sort of two things that I took away from that. Number one, train smart, not hard. I had been training my ass off in advance of this climb. And really, since I got back from Aconcagua, I think this was my first climb after Aconcagua. And man, I came back from Aconcagua with an absolute fire in my belly to train hard, 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 because I was never going to find myself in a position like that again. And what I learned from this climb was it's good to train hard, but you also have to train smart. And I didn't train the right way. There were some things that I could have done differently in my training heading into this climb. And so, you know, again, and you've probably heard this in corporate life as well, work smart, not hard, right? And so the idea is And I had an old boss who used to say, never mistake busy with productive, right? So the idea is, how can you make sure that you're working as hard as you need to, but as smart as you can in pursuit of your goals? And the second lesson that comes from this experience is the idea that, we didn't summit, but this was a training trip. Julie and I, Julie has signed up to climb Denali. Unfortunately, I missed the sign up window, but we both went on this trip for some skills training with a legendary mountain guide named Freddie Wilkinson. And all of the lessons that we learned happened on the way up the mountain. They did not happen, they wouldn't have happened at the summit. The summit is just a destination. The lessons come from the journey, not the destination. So that's the other lesson I want to share with you from our Mount Washington experience. We are coming to the close, and I want to make sure we have time for a little Q&A. This is the summit of one of the two peaks we climbed in Ecuador, which is the trip I just got back from. And the lesson here is meet yourself where you are. And I want to illustrate this lesson. This is something I learned through some of the incredible people I was fortunate enough to be with on this trip. I got into mountaineering because of my love of the mountains. I'm madly in love with the opportunity to challenge myself and learn from challenging myself. But really what I've come to appreciate the most is the people. And the arrow that you see in this picture is pointing to an incredible woman that I met on this trip named Munira. And Munira is, I think, one of the only women in the country of Qatar to be an international mountain climber. As I'm sure you can imagine, Qatar is a desert country at sea level. And there's not a lot of mountaineering coming out of Qatar, especially given the cultural nuances in that part of the world, especially women. And Munira, while I continue to struggle with beating myself up for being in the back of the pack and being one of the last people into camp every night, and I could tell you all day long that there's no trophies and that I've made peace with it, I haven't made peace with it. I'm working on it, right? Munira was a good hour plus behind me. I was near the back of the pack, sometimes on this one, the middle of the pack, because I'm making progress. But, I was one of the slower climbers on this trip. And Munira on any given day was anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes behind me. And I paid such close attention to Munira's general disposition every day at the end of the day, right? What was her mindset? Was she beating herself up? Was she upset with herself for where she was in the pack? And boy, I got to tell you, there wasn't one iota of that negative self-talk that I go through coming from Munira. There was none of it. She was so at peace with where she was in her journey, and she met herself where she was, and she did the absolute best she could. And she did not summit Cotopaxi, and she was at peace with it. I'm sure she would have loved to have summited Cotopaxi. Cotopaxi was the first of the two glacial peaks we climbed. And I was fortunate enough to be there in the moment when she summited Cayembe, which was our second glacial peak. The conditions under which we climbed and summited Cayembe, you can kind of see from this picture what the conditions were. I mean, literally on the way to the summit, my eyelids were starting to freeze shut. It was freezing cold. We were getting bombed by whiteout snow. And Munira, man, did she dig deep and made it to the summit of Cayembe. And I was, I think, at least as thrilled for her, if not more thrilled for her than I was for myself. And I cannot tell you how much admiration and respect I have for how she handled herself on this trip. And the lesson that it really drove home for me is meet yourself where you are, right? That's me on the summit of Cayembe, or no, I think that's Cayembe. And I'm looking pretty happy because I went 2 for 2 on this trip. And if you've been following the history of this story, the two climbs that I had previous to Ecuador, Aconcagua and then Mount Washington, I didn't make the summit of either one of those. And I could talk all day long about the lessons come from the climb, not the destination and all that stuff. It was still pretty emotionally and mentally tough for me to accept the fact that 2 consecutive climbs I didn't make the summit. So needless to say, I was thrilled to make the summit of both Cotopaxi and Cayembe. And this is me on the summit of Cayembe, absolutely caked in snow and loving every thing about it. And here's what I took away from that experience. You know, I was racked with self-doubt the evening of our summit push on Cotopaxi. And I had a really emotional conversation with our lead guide, Aaron, you know, where he said, you got to just kind of do your best and, you know, give it everything you got and see how it goes. And, you know, I cried, full on cried, a grown man, 50 years old. And I full on cried to another grown man talking about the weight of the self-doubt that I bring up the hill. And what I was able to accomplish and reframe for myself the evening of our summit push on Cayambe is I'm just going to go. I'm just going to go and I'm going to give it my absolute best. And I don't give a shit if everybody else gets up there in 6 hours and it takes me 12 or 15. I'm just going to go. And I'm going to go until someone turns me around or until I reach the summit. And I had carried some of that learning from Aconcagua with me into that mindset. And, you know, long story short, my total round trip from the high camp to Cayambe back to the high camp was, I think, 15 hours, which is a very, very brutal, very, very long day. And my fellow climbers got to the summit. Some of them got there an hour, 2 hours before me. Some of them got down an hour, 2 hours before me. And for me, in this particular moment, I chose belief versus doubt. And what that really drove home for me is that it is a choice. And you can absolutely choose to doubt yourself, or you can choose to believe in yourself. It's the same journey. The altitude is no less, whether you carry the doubt up the mountain or belief up the mountain. So why not choose self-belief and just see how it goes? And that's the lesson coming out of Cayambe specifically. So this is just a summary of the lessons that we've covered. I would walk you through them, but I want to leave a minute or two for questions. And I want to share this quote with you. Go outside, see the world, meet new people, experience other cultures, find the outer edge of your comfort zone and step past it. Get comfortable being uncomfortable and find out how much inner strength is inside you waiting for you. Go to faraway places and then go to difficult to get to places in those faraway places. Experience everything this big, beautiful world has to offer. Live big by daring to feel small. Stand under the stars and just be. These are the things that shape us. Go, do, and be. And that is everything to me. That sums up, that one quote sums up everything that these experiences mean to me. And I hope they provide a little inspiration for you to go find the outer edge of your own comfort zone and step past it and see everything this big, beautiful world has to offer. If you have questions, I think we've got a couple minutes for Q&A, and then here's my email address. Feel free to reach out as well. Thank you guys for listening.
Thanks, Kevin. That was awesome. Thank you so much. Why don't we jump to the giveaway? And that way we can stay on for questions if it's okay, kind of a little past 8. But for those who need to get off at 8, we can do the jacket real quick. How's that sound?
Sounds like a plan.
So for those who don't know, we're actually giving away our best-selling jacket tonight, our Atom LT. And the way we're going to do this is we have a list of everyone's names and the order in which you registered for this event. And Kevin doesn't know who or when people registered, so I'm just going to ask him to pick number from 1 to 69, and we're going to give the jacket to that person who lines up with the number he picks. That's awesome. All right, Kevin, it's all you, 1 through 69.
So I've climbed 9 peaks and there's 7 summits. So I'm going to go with the number 7.
Ooh, all right. So the winner is Brian Goldstein.
Nice. Congratulations, Brian.
So Brian, I'm going to go ahead and email you directly, and I'll get your size and we'll get you all set up with the jacket.
That's awesome. And I can tell you guys, and nobody from Arcteryx encouraged me to say anything along these lines. This is the gear that I, early on in my climbing career, this was the aspirational gear. Arcteryx makes absolutely the best gear. It is worth every penny. And I am super stoked for you, Brian. And I encourage the rest of you guys, for those of you local, to pop into the Arcteryx store on Damon in Wicker Park and check out the amazing gear. And you can also visit them online and see all the incredible stuff they have to offer.
So we're going to jump into a couple questions here, and you guys feel free to put something in the chat if you want to ask Kevin a question. We do have one that came in. For someone who's interested in climbing but has never done it, what do you think is a good starting point?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you know, and there's no right or wrong answer, technically speaking. I mean, I wouldn't start with a super technical peak. Altitude affects everyone differently. So the first thing I would say is to get some exposure to altitude, and you can do that in Colorado. You can do that in Washington State. You can do that in any number of places. You probably should not climb Rainier as your first one. That's just silly. But if you want to do an international, have an international experience, I can't recommend the Chilean Patagonia trek enough. It's an absolutely stunning experience. Same can be said for the trek to Everest Base Camp. Definitely higher exposure to altitude on that one. And then there's some nice, again, I don't use the word easy in mountaineering, but there's some peaks here in the States. Mount Baker is a great one that people use as sort of a point of entry into mountaineering. There's a ton of 14ers out in Colorado that are great to just kind of see how you do at altitude and see how you do with pitch and elevation. And so those are some of my recommendations. But ultimately, just get outside. Just experience the beauty of nature in whatever form you find it.
And Leo is asking, how do you train smart versus hard?
Yeah, another great question. And I think the answer is I'll answer specific to mountaineering, and then I'll try and broaden the answer a little bit. There is a concept in training for mountaineering called specificity. And the idea behind specificity is the more specifically you can replicate the conditions and physical movements required to climb a mountain, at the risk of being Captain Obvious, the better that training is going to be. So I have a Peloton upstairs. I love it, but it doesn't do a lot to get me ready to climb a mountain, right? I spent 90 minutes yesterday stepping up and down on a plyo box because that's part of my training program, because that's much more specific to mountaineering. If you live in a mountainous area of the United States or wherever in the world you're listening in from, get out there. There's absolutely no substitute for getting out and getting elevation and getting on your feet and getting a pack on your back. I'm seeing Bella on the screen, and that's my daughter, and she goes to school in Boulder. And, she's got some outdoor aspirations of her own. And, there's just no substitute for getting out there and climbing. If you live in a flat Chicago suburb like I do, Stairmaster, building stairs, treadmill at a 15% incline, anything that can replicate the specificity of what happens in the mountains is how you train smart, not just hard.
DJ is asking, if you failed to reach the summit of a peak, should you go back to repeat or go on to try another elsewhere? Hashtag asking for a friend.
So DJ, at the risk of spilling his tea, DJ came up a little short on Kilimanjaro, and I can say that because I came up short on 2 climbs that I shared in this experience. So there's certainly no shame in that. And I think the question of whether you go back or not is a very personal decision, right? I mean, for me, I view Aconcagua as unfinished business. I have to go back and finish Aconcagua. Number one, because it's one of the 7 summits. And number 2, because I can't live with the decision I made and let that stand. I have to go make that right for myself. That's just the way my brain and heart and soul works. There isn't a right or a wrong answer. Specifically for DJ, yeah, I would encourage you, if it's important to you and valuable to you, and I think there's some beautiful life lessons to learn there, to consider giving it another shot. I also know people who have been one and done in their mountaineering career. Owner of one of my favorite Italian restaurants went and lasted 5 days on Kilimanjaro and said, fuck this, and came home. It just wasn't for her. And she decided in that moment that mountaineering wasn't for her, right? I think there's something to be learned and gained from mountaineering for everyone, but I don't think mountaineering is for everyone. So whether you go back and finish it or not is a very personal decision. For me, it's that, yes, I will be going back and finishing Aconcagua.
Nabil is asking, any advice for Elbrus? It's my 2nd of the 7 summits.
Oh, well, good for you. Yeah, I'll give you a couple of pieces of advice for Elbrus. Number one, make sure that whatever guide company you're going with has designed their trip so that you get to spend a little bit of time in St. Petersburg and a little bit of time in Moscow on the back end of the trip, because my goodness, what a beautiful country and what beautiful people. And like I said, St. Petersburg is probably one of the coolest cities I've ever been to anywhere in the world. So make sure that you take in the experience as holistically as possible. Train smart and hard. I'll tell you, you can't tell in that picture, but my trip to Elbrus predates my relationship with Arcteryx. Christina, you'll appreciate this story. And my outer shell on Elbrus was a $19 Costco rain jacket, which is ridiculous. The conditions on Elbrus are incredibly unpredictable, and we had the nicest weather. Mike Hamill, the owner of this company, Climbing the Seven Summits, who was our lead guide on Elbrus, I think it was something like his 20th summit of Elbrus, and he said it was the best weather he's ever had, and it still wasn't great weather. So I would say you, Nabil, train smart and hard, and with as much specificity as possible. Make sure you get to take in the whole experience that Russia offers, and make sure you bring the right gear. I cannot recommend enough, again, this is going to sound more overtly commercial than I mean it to, but the shell that the smart people had with them on our Elbrus team was the Alpha SV Gore-Tex shell from Arcteryx, and I was lucky enough to bring that shell to Ecuador, and it is bomb-proof. It is for the kind of conditions that you face on Elbrus on a bad day, and on Cotopaxi and Cayambe and some of these bigger peaks that I'm heading to as I make my way through the 7 summits. I cannot recommend highly enough that jacket, and I can't emphasize enough the importance of having the right gear for whatever climb you go on. And good luck to you. It's a great experience.
How about one more? So Brian is asking, clearly you train physically, especially as you're approaching the climb, and always training mentally. You were training all of us mentally for the last hour. Are the climbs more physical or mental, or is it an even balance?
Yeah, these are all such great questions. We mentioned earlier that Bella and I teach martial arts, and I say in martial arts that in a day or two, we can teach anybody every technique that a black belt knows. And the rest of your journey as a martial artist is mental, right? And I would tell you that in climbing, I find it to be a pretty good balance between the physical and mental. You absolutely have to be, there's a very famous climber named Alan Arnett, and he likes to make the distinction between being in good shape and being in mountain shape. And there's a massive difference between those two. So you absolutely have to make sure, and Nabil, make sure that you are in mountain shape, not just good shape, before you go to Elbrus. And so the physical matters. It absolutely does. There's just no arguing that. And the mental aspect of climbing is equally important. You have to be grounded in and present, and all of those demons that I take up the mountain. That's half the battle for me, is trying to lighten that backpack and mentally speaking, and reconcile all that noise before the climbs start and on my way up the mountain, and especially on the eve of our summit pushes.
Great. Well, I think it's time to wrap up. I feel like we could keep going on. This was a great presentation. I know everyone really enjoyed it. I did as well. Thank you so much, Kevin, for being here. We're going to send a follow-up email, and it will have a recording of the whole presentation. So if anybody missed it, they'll be able to watch it, or if anyone wants to forward it to a friend, they'll be able to do so. And we'll also include information on Kevin, his company, and also a special offer from Arcteryx in there for you. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. And especially Kevin, thank you so much for sharing all of these lessons. And we definitely are walking away with some great advice. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks everybody for sticking around and listening.
Thanks, Kev. That was great.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
Great job.
You would rather buy the gear than do what?